My name's John. I love that response. My name's John. You probably already knew that. Filling in for Pastor Josh today. He's down in the South Bay at one of our sister churches, speaking there. And we're continuing today our trek through Genesis. We've been doing this for slowly through Genesis every fall. This is our 6th year. We'll be finishing up next year. So be patient with us. But there's a lot of stories, and so if you've been tracking with us, or if you know separately of the story of Genesis, you know it's a story of human brokenness. Individuals, families, husbands and wives, brothers. That's what we'll really be looking at today. Broken brotherhood. Story of brokenness. The realness of these stories throughout the Bible, but particularly the ones we've been looking at in Genesis. The realness, their objectivity, their honesty about what happened and about the character flaws of the characters. It really validates their accuracy. They were written for people living difficult lives in troubling times, like us. These stories that are from ancient history, in this case 4,000 years ago, or they could be ripped from the pages, maybe not of the headlines, but of the headlines of your life, of your family life. Family dysfunctional, generational family dysfunction in this case. But one key verse, I want you to put up the verse from Romans 8:28. One key verse really stands out. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28. This is an enduring truth of God. It is true for Joseph 2,000 years before it's written, just like it's true for you 2,000 years after it's written. It was actually one of the guiding scriptures that I had when I first committed to God when I was 13. Someone got me to memorize. We know that God causes all things to work together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. That's true of everyone in the story that we'll be reading about today. It's true of everyone in this room. It's true of anybody that could be listening on the live stream. God works things together for good. Remember that, because you're going to need that in the story of your life, certainly in the story of today. Now, don't confuse this God working things together for good with a prosperity gospel, because God's will is not about money and stuff and fame. It's about meaning, challenge, and adventure. It's about connecting to him, and so that you can be a blessing to other people. God's chosen people are not chosen to be the sole recipient of his blessing. And you are God's chosen son or daughter. You're not chosen just to be a recipient of his blessing. You're supposed to receive that blessing, yes, and then you're supposed to multiply that blessing to everyone you know, every life you can touch. And the story today will address, you'll see, we've seen in the stories of Genesis, people make stupid decisions and they reap the benefit of that, unfortunately. But today, the story that we're going to continue with Joseph has no serious character flaws. Not like he's perfect. He's got some immaturity of a 17-year-old. By the way, this is the only biblical story of a 17-year-old. We have 17-year-olds in the room. I won't call anybody out by name. You probably know who they are. And I could particularly identify with this story, partly because of this great, anonymous, enthusiastic, faithful teacher at my grandmother's church in Pittsburgh, California, telling the story of Joseph and Jacob and Esau that we've already gone through, Joseph and his brothers, some of the drama we've seen with the flannel graph. She was very enthusiastic. So that captured my imagination early on. And it also captured my imagination later as a teenager serving God, because I could really identify with Jacob in a lot of ways. Now, last week what we covered, Joseph is the beloved son of Jacob. He's checking on his brothers, and his brothers are much older, so it's like he's an apprentice shepherd, if you will. And he's going to tell all these guys who have been shepherding for 30 or 40 or how many ever years, he's going to show them how to do it. Yeah, because he's the favored son. You know how that works. Because Jacob has, much like his father and his grandfather, Jacob has sown the seeds of favoritism, and he's going to reap violence, of brother-on-brother violence. And Jacob loves Joseph more than all his sons. Joseph is the beloved son. And this is one of the other reasons I could relate to Joseph, because I was the beloved son. I was of my three brothers, two older brothers. I got to be careful because they could be listening. I was the beloved son. That wasn't because I was good or they were bad. It was just the dysfunction of my father, and it cast a bad aura on the family, because whenever favoritism happens like that, a dysfunctional favoritism, it is not a reflection on the sons. It affects the sons and if there are other children, if there's daughters, but it's a reflection of the character of the father, and that is the case in this story. Joseph, it's not his fault he's favored. We'll see how he plays into that in ways he shouldn't. And Joseph, so again, Jacob has shown this favoritism. He's going to be reaping some violent dissension. And this flashy jacket that Jacob gives Joseph. I wore the flashy shirt, by the way. This is the flashiest I could get. So something that's obvious. I mean, it's actually, if you look on the other side, it's actually pinker, but I wasn't going to turn it inside out. The flashy jacket that isn't just a fashion statement, because most of those people in those day and age dress more plainly than an Amishman does today. Very drab stuff. So he's flashy, and it's not just the style that he's wearing. It's like, this is a sign of my status as the beloved son, and this becomes his badge of honor, his coat of honor, basically. Nobody else gets it, but it wounds him nonetheless. So the stories of Genesis, this repeats in Genesis, it repeats throughout the Bible. Really, the story of the Bible is of human brokenness, redemption, and restoration. And this story is no different. But the story today is a dark story. We're not going to see, I'm going to be reminding you that the story does get better, but in the story that we see today, it's just dark. Everybody at the end of this story, not just Joseph, everybody is enslaved to something. Jacob is enslaved to his grief. Joseph is physically enslaved. His brothers are enslaved to their own guilt. The whole family is broken. It's a good thing we have a God who redeems things. So I want to begin the story by reminding you of where it ends. And it ends in a good place. Not today, not in the story that we'll read in chapter 37. But Joseph is going to do some amazing things. God is going to do amazing things through him. And the interesting thing about Joseph is it's not just his father who's favored him. I mean, God has clearly favored him. They wouldn't have known that when he was 17. Maybe he's just another arrogant senior in high school. Sorry. But God will favor him. We know this through his history. And pretty much anybody he works for will favor him. Potiphar down in Egypt, these are stories from subsequent weeks. The jailer, and then eventually Pharaoh. Everybody's going to favor Joseph except his brothers. And that's where the pain is. But remember, when you're in the midst of your own dark story, think of Joseph. Because in this story, he's not going to know how it ends. He's just going to know he's in this hole. Remember that there's a better story. Remember that God works things together for good for those that are called, that love God and are called according to his purpose. And faith, then, that we see in Joseph, that's recorded later on too, we see that faith is what bridges the gap between Joseph's wounded failure right there and the future that God has called him to. But yeah, at the end of the story today, he's going to be sitting in a place of despair. Now, there's some main points that I want to talk about today before we actually get to the scripture. First of all, and these are enduring truths, you cannot command or countermand the will of God. You can't force it. You can't fight it. We'll see how the brothers try to fight it, because they know, maybe they don't know that these dreams are from God, but the fact that there were two dreams that we read about last week with the the sheaves of representing the brothers falling down to the sheaf of Joseph, who's standing tall, the 11 stars and the moon and the sun bowing down to him. The fact that there's 2 dreams probably means it's from God. That's with the way their culture would work. But so they're gonna try to circumvent that. They can't. They will not be able to prevent the will of God from moving forward. And Joseph, we don't know that he really tries to make it happen, but you can't make the will of God happen. What we will see in Joseph in subsequent weeks is how God partners with us in moving his kingdom forward. That's where we step into. Not trying to fight the will of God, not trying to force the will of God, but stepping into moments of God's purpose. And we've got some key players. You probably already know some of them. I think there's one you don't know about, though, even if you know the story, because he sort of snuck up on me, too. Maybe like he stuck up on Joseph. So we have Jacob. He's the father. He's the patriarch. He's the main character. We have Joseph. He's probably the main character in this story for the rest of Genesis, with the exception of next week, chapter 38. We've got the brothers in general, and Judah and Reuben specifically. But there's another guy. There's an anonymous guy who makes this all happen. And we don't know his name. That's why he's anonymous. So, again, main points from the story. You can't command or countermand the will of God. God works through people. The key players I just mentioned. He works through people who are imperfect, sometimes sinful, often dysfunctional, and sometimes anonymous. Another point, deep wounds are easily made and hard to solve. This dysfunction, particularly dysfunction of favoritism that started generations before Jacob, will continue. Jacob has sown the seeds. We'll see how Joseph sort of waters them and cultivates them. But these seeds of favoritism will cause dissension and fear and broken relationships between brothers that will last not just through the length of this story, but for 10, 20, 30, up to 40 years. So the favoritism preceded even the birth of the firstborn, because Jacob was favoring his wife, Rachel. And they'll last till after he's long gone. Yeah, so the deep woundedness is easy to inflict and hard to recover from. And as you think about Joseph's story, particularly as he's, I'm losing this thing. As you think of Joseph's story, particularly as this comes to a strange end for him at the end of 37, remember that God is with you in the storms of life. God is with Joseph at this point. God is going to be with Joseph when he's in the pit. God's going to be with Joseph for the rest of his life, whether or not it feels like it, God is there. And God's goal, the fifth and most important point, God doesn't break things. God's a redeemer and a restorer. It's humans who break things. Jacob breaks things. The brothers break things. So where do we find Joseph? Well, like I say, he's still a boy, 17. The scripture sort of makes a big deal about that. On the cusp of adulthood, but he's still a boy. And he's got a man's job, sort of. They're overseeing, I mean, not exactly overseeing, because he's supposed to be probably learning, shepherding, that word, helping his brothers from before when he made a bad report on him, probably indicates he's like an apprentice shepherd. He's confident in his beloved son status. I mean, he's got that robe. If there was any doubt, now he's got the robe. He's got actually a pretty good work performance, because he went in and saw what they were doing, had all kinds of corrections. You know, if you've ever worked with the newbie on the job, you know, they come in, they know how to do it. They don't need to know your 30 years of training and experience. Yeah, and sometimes they've got some good ideas, but they can come in with an arrogance that is really grating. And when it's your brother, it's even worse. But he comes in with that confident, beloved son status, like sort of looking for his father's approval, not really caring about his brother's relationship. And if you've ever been in a family or a work group that's like that, you've got the one person that's trying to kiss up to the boss, and they don't really care about the rest of the work team. It's like very dysfunctional, even in the occasion that they are right. But again, being favored isn't a reflection on Joseph. It's a reflection on the father. And Joseph, here's the other thing. Like I say, Joseph knows probably instinctively, like in his gut, he knows he's headed for greatness. I mean, not all 17-year-olds know that, right? I think Joseph knows that. And the dreams have validated that. The dreams of him being served by his brothers, even by his parents. And Joseph, thinking he's on the threshold of this, 17, about to turn 18, is going to be, yeah, this is going to be cool. He probably knows what this is going to look like. I'm going to be chief shepherd someday. I'm going to be in charge of all the flocks. I'm going to, maybe I'll add a line of different kind of animals, maybe another agricultural product, whatever. He probably has that real clearly marked. He can see the future, and it's probably a good future. He's probably not talking about stealing other people's flocks or whatever, right? Probably talking about how to develop their flock. It's all good stuff, and if not well carried out, he's not thinking about robbing and stealing and killing. He's thinking about how I'm going to be a better shepherd than even my father was. And this is how I'm going to do it. And this will all make sense because it will fit into God's plan of how they're going to bow down to me because they're not really that good as shepherds anyway. Whatever. He thinks he's got this all nailed, right? And a couple things. He's not only on the threshold of his future, he's on the threshold of a cataclysmic event that is going to shape everything he is. And God is going to do greater than what he could ever imagine. Check it out in Ephesians 3, verse 20. God does beyond what we can ask or even think to ask. Because there's no way, based on his dreams, based on what he knows now, there's no way that Joseph's going to think, you know what? I think it's like I'm going to be taken from the depths of the earth and I'm going to become essentially the ruler of Egypt. I mean, he's going to be the operational ruler of Egypt. I'm going to save my whole family. I'm going to save Egypt. I'm going to save all the surrounding countries. It's like, no, there's no way Joseph can see the greatness of his future. Only God knows that. But also, he can't see what he's going to have to do to get there. His whole view of leadership is skewed at this point. His view of leadership is, I'm up here and they're bowing down. That's man's view of leadership. God's view of leadership, like Pastor Josh was talking last week, how can I serve you? How can I help you? How can we move this up? How can we restore this brokenness? Man gets things completely reversed. You're here to serve me, but from God's perspective, a leader is there to serve the others. This is what we see in Jesus, and this is what we see in other characters, men and women of God, like Paul. Because Joseph doesn't know how much he's going to have to go through yet, but he's going to find out. He has no idea the greatness that awaits him, but he has no idea the trauma that God's going to have to take him through. Not to take him through trauma. God never takes people through that stuff just to see, if he can manipulate their behavior or if he how far he can push them. No, it's always about preparing them for growth, preparing them to move forward. So let's pick up the story here in Genesis 37, verses 12 through 14. On the threshold of his own future with no idea of the trauma that waits him. Now Joseph's brothers went to pasture their flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So when he said to him, "Go now, see if all is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me some word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So there Joseph is already getting going. Jacob has planted the seeds of dysfunction, of favoritism. Now Joseph's going to water them. Because he doesn't say, well, hold on, Dad, because when I brought that bad report before, they didn't like it. I mean, I know some of it was right, probably really right, but I've got to think not just of what's good for you and the flock, Dad. I got to think of what's good for the brothers. Oh no, he's eating it up. He's probably wearing the coat, showing it off, thinking, that's right. That's right. I'll go check up on him. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go to see what I can do to them. And part of it might be actually technically correct. But the brokenness of the brotherhood is not going to be made better, even if it was better for the flock. Again, Joseph's immature view of leadership. I'm the leader, you're here to serve me. The biblical view of leadership, Jesus, obviously the ultimate leader, the servant leader. How can I serve you? The most frequent question Jesus asks, someone comes up to him, somebody he's probably never seen before, doesn't know. Jesus, most frequently, his first question is, what do you want me to do for you? Not, get down and worship me, I'm the Son of the living God. Also true. Jesus says, what can I do for you? What do you want? We also learn this from Paul. Paul, who's obviously one of the great men of the New Testament, was the second biggest writer of the New Testament, in case you didn't know. He didn't write most of the New, he's not the one who wrote the most amount of the New Testament, that was Luke, but Paul wrote the most books. He did an incredible amount of theology and evangelism and so forth. He has the credentials from the Harvard School, the equivalent of the Harvard School in Jerusalem. He does not say, yeah, you listen to me, I know what I'm doing. God does not say, hey, I've chosen you because you're the greatest, because you've got all the credentials, you've got all the knowledge, you've got all the guts that it takes. No. Why? What is the first message that when Jesus knocks him down and sends him into Damascus, the message from Ananias is, you got to go tell this guy how much he's going to suffer for me. It's pretty tough, pretty tough. So you'll see this constantly in the scripture. You'll see it in between Jesus and his apostles. It's like, hey, can I be the head guy and then my brother be the next head guy? No, you don't understand how God did. No, it's servant leadership. It's get down and wash people's feet, either physically or metaphorically. But this is just the way a favored son would act. And I can look back in times of my own favored son status back in the day where I'm thinking, I shouldn't have to do this task. That's something for the unfavored brothers, right? And I'm not justifying. I'm just saying that's just like very real world. It's like, no, they're being mean to me, and they can be mean to each other, but they should not be mean to the favored son, right? But it was never like said that blatantly, but it's that endemic in a dysfunctional and favorite household. So he sends him off. So by the way, they're headed from southern Israel, which is a little bit below Jerusalem. They're going up above Jerusalem. So this Shechem place is about 40 miles north of where they are. So that's quite a trek, because if you're walking by yourself, you probably go 10, 15 miles a day. So it takes a few days to get there. And then he arrives, verse 15. So he's up there looking for his brothers. Now, he's not just looking for a few brothers, right? There's probably several of them, up to 10. Because there's 12 brothers, and Joseph's one, and Benjamin's probably too young to be going, but it could be up to 10 brothers. They've got, I don't know even, but probably thousands of sheep and goats and so forth. They probably have other servants and maybe slaves, I don't know, but they have a large household. So this is a big entourage you're trying to find. Remember the key players: Joseph, Jacob, Reuben, Judah, the other brothers. And a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Now, this is a truth you can apply now in your life, in your neighborhood, in your school, in your workplace, wherever you go. This man is anonymous. He comes from nowhere and goes nowhere. We don't know anything about him. No reason to think he's an angel or some kind of physical appearance of God, because that happens in other places in Genesis, and it lets us know that. As far as we know, this is just a guy. This is just a guy who steps anonymously into a moment. First of all, how he gets in this large, wild area of meadow and maybe some forest, how he even gets close enough to the brothers to find out, that they're going someplace else, we don't know. How he gets close enough to Joseph, we don't know. But he knows he pays attention. We know this. He pays attention to what's happening around him. He pays attention. Maybe he doesn't know what he's going to do with it. Maybe God's put him on a special assignment here. We don't know. But we know he pays attention to what's happening around him. He gets that information about the brothers. And then he notices Joseph wandering around. This is probably a little more obvious because it's not like this big group of sheep and men moving around. It's probably a little more obvious that we've got that one guy. He's all by himself. I don't know what's he doing. What's he wandering around? Joseph's just wandering. You think Joseph is like more self-directed at this point, but he's not. He's wandering around. And it's like, if you can, this is the days before air pollution, so he can probably see. If he gets up on a little mound like the Mount Tabor or something, he can probably see for 10, 15, 20 miles away. He's just wandering. And this guy sees him wandering. And this guy connects Joseph to his brothers. Now, it's sort of going to be bad news for Joseph. He's about to get sold into slavery and beat up. But this man's job is to connect, to pay attention to what's happening around him and connect. So you probably know people whose lives you speak into, people you work with on a regular basis, your kids, your parents, your students, whatever. But whose life are you stepping into anonymously? A moment at Starbucks, at Bel Air, Rayleigh's. Or, in my case, downtown Reed City, Michigan. So I'm walking by. I noticed this guy. First of all, I've been in a thrift store. My wife, considers thrift storing a skill and an entertainment. Pray for me. So I see a book called Wild at Heart. It's a really good book about masculine righteousness. Great book. I've been through it, but I don't really have anybody to buy it for. So I just like, okay, nice to know. Unlike my wife, I'm not gonna import books back to California. We'll be able to find them here. And no need to import Amish noodles back to Sacramento. I'll just leave that in Michigan. So walk then down the street with her brother-in-law, walk by this guy, and he's getting out of his expedition in front of a laundromat. Laundromat's sort of a weird thing nowadays. Getting out of taking his clothes into the laundromat, and he's wearing exercise shorts. And I mean, that's all he's wearing. No shirt, no shoes, probably nothing else. Just his exercise shorts. I'm thinking he's probably washing everything he owns in the laundromat. So I think I probably should connect with this guy, but I don't. I keep walking, come back. I think I know I got to connect with this guy. I'm gonna be like this guy, anonymous, stepping into a moment of God's purpose, which I do. I just go in the laundromat, strike up a conversation with him. I know it sounds weird, and I make it look easier than it is. I make it seem easier than it really is, but it's just practice. We get into this great conversation. He's moving to Nashville for this big adventure. I talk about how every man needs an adventure to live, a battle to fight, and a beauty to rescue. And we have this really intense, I'm sort of dressed like this. He's dressed in his exercise shorts. I have a good talk with him. I pray with him. I have no idea if he has a faith background. I leave, and then I think, oh, adventure. He's going on an adventure. I'm going to go over and get that book, Wild at Heart, for him, and talk about how every man needs a beauty to rescue, a battle to fight, and an adventure to live. We talk about that. He opens it up. He's very open to it. He opens it up, points to this random thing on page 37, talks about the Lion of Judah, which of course ultimately is Jesus, but God wants men to be courageous as lions. So he reaches in the dryer and has this shirt talk about being a Lion of Judah. It's a great moment. I don't know how that story will end, but I know because I was paying attention to what was happening around me, I was able to step in that moment. And I could literally go on for hours probably talking about those kind of moments, but I'll tell you the moment that wounds me the most, and this is from about 15 years ago, but it still hurts. It's like I was in Starbucks, next to Starbucks is Nugget courtesy clerk comes out. He is sobbing uncontrollably. You see, I wasn't oblivious to his pain. I could tell he was in pain. I just didn't do anything about it. I just let him cry. I didn't step into that moment. And it's those times that I have failed to step in the moments that move me forward. So think about this anonymous guy. We'll never know who it is until we get to heaven, maybe. Whose lives do you need to step into? Whose lives are you in? Can you anonymously speak to words of courage or strengthening, or maybe just like common sense? Now the plot's going to thicken, because Joseph's going up towards his brothers, going up at this place, Dothan, is about 10 or 20 miles north of Shechem. He's going up, and you can just imagine how he's going up. Verse 18, they see him from afar. You see, here's where the coat comes to hurt him. He's thinking of it, I'm wearing my coat as a sign of my status. They'll surely respect my status. I mean, they probably don't like me. They probably know more about it, but it's like, this is the closest. This is like I am the crown prince. They will respect this. Well, what it actually does is it lets them be able to see him. It's not just like some dirty brown thing he's wearing that, you can see this thing at 5 miles, 10 miles, whatever, right? And so that's why I wore this. They can see it coming. He thinks it's a badge of honor. It's going to give them some heads up time to plot, and it's nothing good. They saw him from afar. Before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this master of dreams, literally like Baal like Lord, master of dreams. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we'll say a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. So they've got this plan. Now, you wonder how they jump from whatever they're doing as shepherds to seeing him, and then they jump immediately to premeditated murder. Yeah, that's sort of a puzzle, how that happens so instantaneously. But when Reuben heard it, now, Jonathan told us in August, remember, Reuben is the oldest brother. He has special responsibility. He not only represents the father, he's supposed to, except this is sort of a messed up situation with Joseph being the beloved son. He's supposed to represent the father in getting things reconciled to God. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness. Do not lay a hand on him, that we might rescue him out of their hand, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. This pit, by the way, is a big cistern, probably about the size of this room, something like that. It's huge, but probably taller, maybe 20. This is, I think, 16 feet, maybe 25 to 30 feet tall. There's no way he's getting out of there. It's carefully sculpted, maybe even tiled to keep water in. There's no way he's getting out of there. This is a death sentence. And the fact that there's no water in there means he has 5 days before he dies. So this is interesting how it goes so quickly to premeditated murder. But see, it didn't just start there, right? It just didn't start there. It started with their bitterness, because first they hate. That's been going on probably for all of Joseph's life. That's probably been going on all of Joseph's life, even before. Then they objectify Joseph. We know this happens later when they present the evidence to Jacob. This is your son's coat. They don't say this is our brother's coat. They plot, and to the brothers, this isn't an act of senseless violence. To us, it's an act of senseless violence, brother-on-brother violence. To them, it makes total sense. We'll get rid of our problem. He's been a thorn in our side. We'll just end it. They assault Joseph to get him in there. They actively delegate evil. They're thinking, okay, well, we'll just let him die. We were going to kill him. We won't kill him. We'll just let him die in there. And then it's going to change in a little bit. Well, let's just sell him into slavery. So we didn't actually, other than, well, he sort of fell. I think I sort of pushed him. He fell into the pit. I didn't kill him. I didn't hit him. They're going to be looking for ways to absolve themselves of guilt, and then to cover up the blood, cover up the story. Now, again, we know this story today is not going to end well. The big story ends well. Even at the very end of the verse, the last verse of the chapter, not too bad. But I want you to step in the moment with me in the despair with Joseph. If you've already known the story ends well, forget that for a moment. Think of the despair of Joseph. We know from later verses he has pled with mortal pleading for his life. He's begged them, don't, not in there, no. And then when he gets down there, it's like, God, where are you? What are you doing to me? Do you know what they're doing? I mean, what about all those great things you do? What about that? Now, again, we know the story. At that moment, all Joseph knows is despair and loneliness and nakedness and the specter of death. Yeah, they're going to kill him. They're going to dispose of his body. Now, in probably one of the most sociopathic sentences anywhere in literature, let alone the Bible, after all that, after hearing his, no, don't do that, no, don't, have mercy on me. Verse 25, they sat down to eat. How does that even happen? How do you move from murderous intent towards your brother to sitting down to a prime rib? It just makes no sense. It shows you the depth of their depravity. There's just no other way to, this is sociopathic behavior. Like not even being able to hear his screams, they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. This is sort of like a reference to the Matthew 2 story where Joseph and Mary and Jesus' family will be taking some of their gifts down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not let our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." By the way, we know from later scripture that Joseph is very good looking. So what kind of slavery is he going to be sold into? Nothing good. And his brothers listened to him. Then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. It's about $170. They took him to Egypt. So the brothers, Judah's got this great idea. We won't do anything. We won't touch him. By the way, his brothers don't get him out of the pit. The Midianites get him out of the pit and sell him. I don't know. The last I saw him, if they had to force this, which they're not, the last I saw him, he was falling in a pit. I don't know. But they were behind it all. But plausible deniability. It wasn't our hands, but it was their hands. It was their hands. Again, Reuben's tried to change things. That's not going to work out well. Joseph is left to die, then sold into slavery. What kind of slavery? How is that going to end? Not well. Don't know. They can say probably the brothers, again, they just finished their prime rib. Probably, I don't really care, not on me, but he's not my problem anymore. Yeah. And that's where the fallacies, this exposes three common fallacies in life. Let's just get rid of our problem. Let's objectify that problem, get rid of it. Apply this to whatever, factions in your work, factions politically. The Democrats say, let's just get rid of the Republicans. Republicans say, let's just get rid of the Democrats. Let's just get rid of the Jews or whatever group. Get rid of, in family therapy, when there's a child that's acting out, let's just get rid of that child. Actually, the child most likely is acting out the dysfunction of the family. He or she's the identified patient. But we can just get rid of them and then everything will be okay. That is never true. Yeah, no one will ever know. We've already got a plan for how we're going to cover it up. We're going to take that jacket and we're going to ruin it, which does two things. It's going to ruin the jacket, and then What do you think of the blood? There's no such thing as DNA testing yet, so he's not going to know it's goat's blood. Yeah, no one will ever know. Well, we're talking about it 4,000 years later, so that tells you something. But they also don't know, and they don't know the damage that they've done. Not just to their father, not just to their brother, but to their own heart. Because they're going to carry this guilt individually. It's the kind of family secret they probably never talk about until they have to talk about it in 20 years, as we'll see in next year, actually. But it's the dirty family secret they can't talk about that's wounded them. And from Joseph's perspective, here's another fallacy. My plans are failing, therefore God is failing. Nope. God is going to be rebuilding, systematically rebuilding Joseph's approach, his ability, his tenacity, his steadfastness, his perseverance, his humility. He's going to be steadfastly building that. So he's ready for the great future that he can't even see yet, but God sees it. The cover-up, verse 29. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and where shall I go? Because he's the oldest son. He's the man, he's supposed to be the man in charge. Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not our brother's robe, your son's robe. And he identified it and said, it's my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. He really never stopped mourning for his son. The mourning of Joseph was much worse than I think anybody had predicted. All his sons, because he's got the younger son from Rachel, Benjamin. Apparently this doesn't even comfort him. All his sons and all his daughters, there's 11 other sons, we can only guess there's 4 or 5 other daughters, rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Then said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning. Thus the father wept for him. Now see, the brothers, again, they think they've gotten away with something. And if someone asks them, well, what happened to Joseph? Oh, I don't know. Our dad thinks he must have been torn apart by an animal or something and then just killed and never found. I'm not sure what they did with the robe. Maybe they tore it, something to make it look as if it wouldn't really be coming in one piece if an animal had really torn him apart. So the hate, so this is the result of the hate that started out in their heart, and that's why Jesus tells us, don't let hate harbor in your heart, because it'll come out in ways you can't predict and in ways you can't control. Don't harbor hate. So the story's not over. We're ending in a dark place. There's a glimmer of hope in verse 36 here. There's a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him to Egypt, to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Now, the story next week is going to get into Genesis 38, where Judah is so wounded by what's happened, he's going to go off and do some things he shouldn't do. And then we'll get back to the story of Joseph in 39. This is how a classically good writer, even if you weren't Moses, inspired by Moses, Moses writing inspired by God, this is like just a little teaser. And then we shift directions next week and then come back to this story. But it is good news in the sense that he hasn't been sold into the fields to brick making or the agricultural fields. He's been sold to a person of substance. So things might be looking up. But from Joseph's perspective, and here's the personal application for you at some point in your life, again, you don't have to be 17 to be experiencing this kind of thing, where there's a disconnect between where you are, or somebody you really love or are mentoring, where you are and where God is going to be taking you. The bridge between, the bridge that spans that gap, that's where the faith comes in. And that's what we'll see in the life of Joseph as he lives out his faith. He doesn't know how this is all going to unfold. He's just going to do the best job he can in Potiphar's household. He's going to do the best job he can in the jail. So the difference between our current reality and the reality that God has for us, that's where the bridge of faith comes. And that's the enduring meaning of Romans 8:28. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. This was as true when Paul wrote it about 70 AD as it was when Joseph was experiencing it about 1800 or 2,000 years before that. And it's true of us 2,000 years later. I don't know what God's doing in your life. I don't know whose life you need to be stepping into. I don't know where you are in this versus that and the faith it takes. But I know this, that God is working all things together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. And that includes every one of us. And Joseph, who has seen every dream of his die at this point, everything he thought was going to happen die. It hasn't died. It's just really beginning to live. But this time, when it's done now, it won't be based on a faulty foundation of being the beloved Son. It'll be built on the foundation from the living God, as Joseph is ultimately his son, and as we are his sons and daughters. Let's pray. God, I just thank you. Well, I thank you for tough times, God, because that's when you show up. You're always there, but we tend to think we don't need you until the times get tough and our plan fall flat or worse. But I thank you that you're there in all circumstances. I thank you that you have a better future for us in this life and in the next life, better than we could ask or think to ask. So regardless of where our reality is today and where you are taking us, I hope that you'll give us, I pray that you'll give us the faith to make it, the faith to know that you are doing good things and that you are always a good God doing good in our lives, even through the pains and trials of life. In Jesus' name, amen.